Okay, we are recording. I am Brandon Polite, professor of philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Jenny Judge, who is a lecturer in philosophy at the University of Melbourne in Melbourne, Australia. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So you've been thinking quite a bit recently about Spotify, and how algorithms affect our aesthetic tastes and our musical preferences in particular. And so I want to start with a somewhat basic question for people who might not be familiar with how it works. How does Spotify's recommender system work?
Yeah. Okay. So, first of all, Spotify's recommender system is an instance of a very general type of technology, which is ubiquitous pretty much across the internet. So, Google search is a recommender system. Your sat nav, your Google Maps, also a recommender system. Companies like Amazon online shopping recommender system, your social media feeds recommender system. And basically what a recommender system does is it scans a catalog of items, whatever those items might be, and it orders them in a list in descending order of kind of rank according to some information about what the standard, what the kind of criteria, what the criterial factors are. So, on your social media timelines, for example, it's going to present you with the stuff that it thinks you want to see in the order in which you are most likely to stay engaged, that sort of thing. Okay, so Spotify's recommender system then, same thing. It wants to scan a catalog, produce a list. The catalog in question is the catalog of music that's available on Spotify, which is massive. The information, the kind of, criteria that determine the ordering that it issues are basically your preferences, or rather its sense of what your preferences are. So what it wants to do is, what it needs to do, if it's going to be able to give you like an ordered list of stuff that is going to, be stuff you want to hear, it has to do two things effectively. Like one thing it has to index its catalog according to like musically relevant criteria. It makes extensive use of music information retrieval to do that. That's a big field in computer science, where basically you can kind of like extract musical properties automatically from analyzing digital files, basically. So, it makes extensive use of that over there. And then on the preferences side, it also needs to get a handle on what your preferences are. How does it do that? Well, if you use Spotify, you know that when you sign up, you tell it some artists you like and that sort of thing. But that's really only the tip of the iceberg. The main way that it infers your preferences is it monitors your behavior on the site and potentially also off the site, given the ubiquity of cookies right now. And it infers from that what you like to listen to. So the general principle, which we're probably all kind of aware of, is like, oh, you play it for more than 30 seconds, you like it, you play it repeatedly, you really like it. If you skip it, you don't like it, blah, 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 right? And also, not just that particular thing, but like other things that are like that particular track. But I mean, Spotify tracks an awful lot more stuff about you than your behavior, your skipping and your playing and stuff like that. It also tracks your location. It tracks the time of day where you are. It tracks whether you're moving or not, right? It can infer if you're commuting, for example, if you're moving at a steady rate and it's 8 a.m. or whatever. It infers your mood as well from the music that you're listening to. So like if you're listening to angry breakup playlist, it will infer that you are angry and have been broken up with or something. And also, it can get information as well, like from your wearable devices as well, if you have an Apple Watch. And the stated rationale for all of that is, oh, look, we need to be able to know in a really fine-grained way what your preferences are at any time t, so that we can recommend you the perfect music to listen to at time t. But of course, like conveniently for Spotify, they are also making bank by selling all this information about you to third parties. So anyway, so that's basically how the recommender system works.
Well, that's creepy as hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's gathering information on your preferences as a way, I guess, as it's presenting it, it's
Mhm.
we're wanting to tailor you with the best musical experience possible, right? So like the weekly or daily playlists, right? That it sort of
Yeah.
works its way through. It has the right song, like the best
Yeah.
possible DJ, right? It knows exactly what song to put on next to follow from that. And it does that by tracking your engagement, right? So if you skip a song, it's like after 10 seconds or so, it knows you don't like it. And so it won't come up in the playlist again. And then, it's creating this digital, I don't know what word I want, but like digital portrait or digital biography of you
Yeah.
as a way of keeping you engaged with the system, and especially if you aren't on Spotify Premium, to like give you ads, right? Because the more you engage with it, the more ads you're going to hear, and therefore the more revenue they're going to make. But at the same
Yeah.
time, more underhandedly, it seems like they're selling your data left and right. And so, if they have
Yeah.
reason to believe, I mean, believe may be the wrong term here, but if they have reason to believe that you've been dumped, they may sell that information
Yeah.
elsewhere, and then you'll get targeted ads for, I don't know, Kleenex or something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so Spotify made quite a lot of noise about their capacity to infer mood from the music you're listening to, which, by the way, is really shaky. As anybody who has thought at all about the correlation between one's state as one listens to music and the expressive content of what one listens to. But nevertheless, anyway, Spotify a couple of years ago made a big noise to investors about like, oh, Spotify is really unique because we can infer real-time information about people's emotional states, and nobody else can do that. And even if that's like actually not true, the fact is that people think it's true, and investors are, it's like Spotify's unique selling point, basically. So like that information, I mean, it's unclear how much money they're actually making off it right now, but several authors that I've read have argued that this information is basically a sort of an asset. It's basically a gold mine that they're sitting on. It's part of what's responsible for the fact that Spotify has a massive market valuation, despite the fact that it has actually only just barely begun to turn a profit. So, you can kind of join the dots about that because, yeah, anyway, it is very creepy. But yeah, Spotify's, there are two aspects to the unique selling point thing. One, we can track you at all times of the day because you listen to music at all times of the day, or like a lot of people do. And secondly, we can infer really private information about your emotional state. And like obviously advertisers, that's exactly what they want. So yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think Spotify thinks of someone like me who does not listen to playlists at all? I just
Yeah.
listen to like the same set of maybe 10 albums, and I use it
Hmm.
largely as a way to access music in my office on campus, which typically I
Yeah.
own in another format at home.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so like artists are making 0.0001 cent each time I stream a song, whereas I've already bought the album.
Yeah.
And so, uh, I'm not the type of consumer that they're after, right?
No, you're not. And, a lot of people do use Spotify that way. They use it as a kind of, some people also use it as a sort of a catalog, maybe they own the stuff already. They put a lot of time into kind of making playlists of their own rather than listening to the Spotify generated playlists. It's worth noting, though, that Spotify also, that user is actually a good user for Spotify for the following reason. Spotify, one of the main ways that it infers the expressive properties of tracks and also like what you are likely to like is that it actually monitors the playlists that users create themselves. And so, if you listen to song X, it'll scan its own, like what's going on Spotify, and it'll find other users that have that song in a playlist. And then it'll give you another song from that playlist on the assumption that, that person probably likes the same sort of stuff as you. So like the effectiveness of Spotify's recommender system is actually completely parasitic on the unpaid labor of its users that actually really care about music and put a lot of time into curating their playlists. That's also
Gotcha.
kind of another like slightly gross aspect
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
whole thing.
right. Yeah, I don't even curate playlists. I'm like, I guess
Right.
a digital hipster in the sense that like I just listen to an album all the way through. And then as
Yeah.
soon as like
Yeah.
the recommended song comes on, I stop and then go to a different album and listen to it all the way through.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
don't
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
love me, I guess, because I'm not giving them a
No.
lot of that information.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is right. They probably are not into you.
Awesome. I'm cool with that. So
Yeah.
I guess, there are a couple directions we could go. I mean, there are obviously like moral, ethical implications of this sort of
Mhm.
surveillance and this sort of digital musical profile it's creating for each of us. And then there are aesthetic implications, right? Maybe we can just briefly
Mhm.
start with the moral implications and then get to, what I'm interested in as an esthetician and what you're presumably interested in too
Yeah.
is the aesthetic consequences of this. So how do you feel about, what this recommender system doing and Spotify's algorithm is doing more generally from the moral angle? It seems morally, I mean, it seems creepy straight off the bat,
Yeah.
but it also seems
Yeah.
morally problematic in
I,
terms of the selling of data, et cetera.
Yeah, I think it is morally problematic. I think it's actually particularly reprehensible given that, what Spotify is expressly trying to do is it's trying to identify it's trying to infer your emotional states and exploit those emotional states for the purpose of selling you stuff that you probably don't need, right? So, like whether or not it actually succeeds in successfully inferring your emotional states or not, the fact is that that's precisely the intention. The intention is to exploit you when you're vulnerable, effectively. They want to hang a big neon sign, a big neon arrow over your head at those moments when you're feeling blue or you're feeling anxious or you're feeling whatever it thinks you're feeling on the basis of what you're listening to, and basically say to advertisers like, "Hey, come over here. There's a live one here." And I think there's something really troubling about that, to be quite honest. And I think that, sometimes Spotify kind of flies under the radar because people think of it as, oh, I love Spotify. I listen to music on Spotify. It's one of the only tech companies that I don't like, encounter hate speech and, political polarization on. Maybe it's like they're one of the good guys, but like actually there's a lot of really troubling stuff happening behind the scenes that I think people would be well advised to be more aware of. Yeah. So,
Well,
but I mean, that's obviously just one side of the ethical coin. There's also the way that artists are being shafted left, right, and center because of the streaming economy. But like, anyway, there's a whole bunch of things we could discuss under this banner.
yeah, yeah, right. That if they could pay artists at a fair rate, the company would just fold, right? They could not
Yeah.
exist without
No.
underpaying
Yeah.
recording
Right.
artists,
Exactly.
which hurts especially, indie artists and,
Yeah.
small scale artists who need the platform to promote themselves and their music.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's talk about the aesthetic implications of
Mhm.
this, right? Again, they're creating sort of a taste profile,
Yes.
and a sort of taste profile, but also like a minute to minute mood
Yeah.
chart, right? Of,
Right.
How you're feeling from one moment to the next. And so what do you think are some of the problematic aesthetic implications of the Spotify algorithm?
So I think so. One of the problematic implications that I have been thinking about is that the algorithm, as it's currently designed, makes it harder for you to actually develop your musical taste in the following sense. So basically, to become better at kind of assessing music aesthetically, at being able to tell what makes a piece of music good or not, and also to just to kind of cultivate in yourself an appreciation for music that is, deemed by people in the know to, in fact, be good. And whether that's, I mean, I'm not just talking about like, good taste is taste for jazz or classical music or anything like that. It's a matter of being able to identify the good pieces of music, basically. And like, I think it's intuitive that there is a difference between good music and bad music. We might fret about the boundaries, the extensions of those sets, but there is a difference. So anyway, like, given that the development of taste, like becoming a better listener, becoming kind of a more fine-grained listener, being able to tell what's contributing to the value of music and what isn't. The reason I think this is damaged by Spotify's recommender system as it's currently designed is because the recommender system is explicitly designed to only give you stuff that you're already antecedently likely to like. And so, if you're trying to, part of what you're doing, if you're trying to kind of cultivate taste, I mean, it's a kind of a rubbish word because it has all these elitist connotations, but if you're trying to cultivate like an aesthetic capacity in yourself, like what you need to do is you need to select music to listen to at least partly on the basis that it's good music, as opposed to purely on the basis that like, this is likely to satisfy me in particular. And the problem is that Spotify's system is completely blind to aesthetic value. The only value that it sees is your preferences as it understands those preferences to be. And so it actually is by design, like really badly equipped to ever present you with music that is good purely for that reason alone, And so that's one aspect. But another aspect is that it also doesn't help you to listen in a fine-grained way, right? So another thing you need if you're going to cultivate kind of aesthetic appreciation in yourself is that, sometimes you do encounter like a new piece of music or something, a new genre, and you're like, I don't know what's going on here. Like, so people obviously really dig it, but like, I can't make any headway. And what you really need in that case is you need someone to kind of come along and point out some of the parameters to you that are the ones that are mattering, and that, and then ideally you listen out for those things and you start to get it, right? And it might take time, but this is part of how aesthetic discourse kind of unfolds. And of course, Spotify is also really bad at that, because it just dishes you up this list of songs that, like, not only does it not tell you what to listen out for, but it doesn't even present them in any sort of sensible musical order. Like, you might get a reggae tune right up next to, like a bit of metal or whatever in your Discover Weekly. It doesn't matter. It's like, whatever, I'm just going to give you a bunch of stuff that you're likely to like. And it doesn't help you by grouping things or by saying like, if you like this, then maybe you should also check out this. And here's something that's really interesting about this, whatever. It doesn't do any of that stuff. So those are, two primary reasons, I think, why Spotify, well, at best doesn't help you to cultivate your aesthetic capacities, but I think it also gets in the way because, people, I mean, one reason for that is because people are becoming increasingly reliant on platforms like Spotify to give them new music. They can kind of fall into the false, idea that, oh my God, I'm developing my taste. I'm listening to all this different stuff, this new stuff that I'd never listened to before. But like, really what's going on is that it's just giving you new inputs to your existing taste as it understands that taste to be. It isn't actually helping you to cultivate your taste. And if you think that that's what it's doing, then there's a risk that you just won't end up doing that, right? Because, you'll be relying on it to do X, whereas it in fact does Y. So you'll never end up doing X.
Okay, cool. So that last point has to do with our aesthetic agency, right? In a sense, it's robbing us of our aesthetic agency because we're not actively exploring anything anymore. It's just we're sort of passively consuming whatever inputs it's giving us from moment to moment, basically.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is still possible to exert agency by, you just go to the platform and you're like, okay, whatever about the recommender algorithm, I'm just going to look for this one band that my friend told me to check out or whatever. And yeah, you can do that, right? And you can kind of like push back and you can exert aesthetic agency in that way. But I think what's noteworthy is that the whole system is sort of like nudging you, to use a problematic bit of corporate speak. It's nudging you towards not doing that, It wants you, because like the recommender system doesn't just generate the playlists that you see and the Discover Weekly playlist and stuff. It also determines the ordering in which you encounter it, like the stuff that the albums you like to listen to. It's like, oh, it's 11 o'clock. Brandon likes to listen to, AC/DC or whatever. So it'll push that in front of you, as opposed to something else that might also be cool, So it's actually really hard to avoid the recommender system on Spotify. And also it's worth noting that as the user interface has evolved over the years, the search box, it used to be this big thing in the middle of the screen. And now it's this little tiny little thing up in the top left corner. So, the affordances of the interface are really disincentivizing you from exerting your aesthetic agency, which I think is also a problem.
Yeah. Sit back, relax, and we'll take care of the musical curation for you.
We'll take all the work out of listening. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's one creepy sci-fi ethical concern here, which is if it can identify your mood, it could potentially manipulate your mood. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By okay, sequentially next song will make it slightly more happy or slightly sadder. Yeah. And then all right, here's the ads for facial tissue because now you're weeping. Right. Whereas half an hour before you were in a perfectly okay mood. Right. And so it's a way of selling you products based on it manipulating your mood from, over a stretch of time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think it's too far-fetched to suppose, that is part of the pitch that they're currently making to investors. Precisely those kind of applications are the ones that are responsible for Spotify's having the outsized market value that it currently has, given its complete failure to turn a profit until quite recently. Obviously it's worth noting that I think, that sort of sci-fi scenario where you're manipulated by what you're listening to into a vulnerable mood, it is possible, but I think it's a hugely simplistic way of understanding our relationship to music, as though it's just some sort of contagion that we just passively absorb, we don't. But I mean, the other thing is, sorry, I'm getting excited now, so I'm talking too much. But the other thing is, right, this is another way in which Spotify kind of hampers your aesthetic life, is that Spotify explicitly wants you to kind of listen in the background. It explicitly is encouraging a kind of passive listening, because what it wants you to do is it wants you to have music on all the time, while you're working, while you're working out, while you're having dinner with your family, whatever. It wants you to have music on all the time. And, you can't effortfully engage with music all the time, right? So it just wants you to kind of have it sort of burbling away in the background. And when you're listening in that inattentive way, music can actually, be a kind of an affective contagion, designers of shopping malls have known this for a long time. So actually there's a sense in which, if Spotify were really encouraging a kind of active, engaged listening, it wouldn't be able to impact your mood in the way that you were just talking about. However, given that it doesn't incentivize that kind of listening, and instead incentivizes passive listening, then it actually is capable, at least in principle, of manipulating you in this way. So.
Yeah, right. And so it's, what you're saying is Spotify devalues music in two ways. Economically, in the sense that it pays less for music than if you were to the artist, if you were to just buy the thing. Right. Mm-hmm. And two, it devalues music aesthetically, in the sense that it wants us to use it as a way of soundtracking, being a soundtrack to our lives, which is just sort of in the background. And characters in a movie, they're not aware of the music that's playing most of the time. And in a sense, they just want the music going 24/7, because then they can make more money off of us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That sucks. But on the question of taste, right? One of the points that you made is that Spotify is at best neutral with respect to helping us cultivate our taste, because all it does is giving us music that we'd antecedently prefer based on, it's deep learning of these things. Right. And so, here's a very basic question about taste, I guess, which is, why think that our taste can get better over time and not merely change over time, right? And so you mentioned that the word taste is problematic because of the implication of elitism, and I want to push on that, right? So why say that, me overcoming the stuff I used to like and liking the better stuff, quote unquote, is better for me aesthetically in some sense, and better for my life in general, right? To shift out of, I don't know, what would be a good musical case here? Like kids bop music or something, right? To like the good stuff, or like from Nelly to Wu-Tang Clan. I don't know, like from the
that seems reasonable.
More mainstream stuff to like the deeper, richer sort of stuff. Which, all right, I sort of implied there that I agree with you, but I want to take a skeptical stance here. Like, well, I think that our taste can improve.
Okay.
Period. Question mark.
Okay. I mean, I was hearing two questions in there. One question was, how do we know when if our taste is improving in this sense? And the other question is, why should we care about this? Like, what is good about having, being more discerning or whatever? Okay. So the first question, how can we know? So I think you're right that like the way to know isn't just that you happen to be listening to what, all of the critics in the fancy newspapers or whatever are listening to, or you're listening to all the stuff that gets rated 8+ in Pitchfork or something. So that's, that might be part of it, but like that can't be the whole story, because you could just be aping people, you like, as I understand it, aesthetic, the capacity to evaluate things aesthetically is like quite a rich capacity. And as I said earlier, it's not just about being able to, tell what's good on the basis of listening to it, right? Which also the ape wouldn't necessarily have, that I was just talking about. The ape is just like, okay, I'm just going to listen to, this stuff because these people are listening to it. And superficially, I look like I have really good taste, but actually I wouldn't know a good piece of music from a hole in the wall if you put them in front of me. But like, assuming that you do get to a position where you can actually reliably tell within certain genres, like what's good and what's not, then I think having good taste, it doesn't just bottom out there, because, aesthetic experience is not just a matter of getting to the finish line anyway. It's like, the point of aesthetic engagement isn't just to, listen. Oh, it's good. Okay, done. In fact, it's kind of the other way around. Like Nelson Goodman makes this point, like the point of aesthetic evaluation or like aesthetic judgment is actually to direct you back to the music itself and notice what's good about it, right? And this is the other side of having a cultivated aesthetic capacity. It's a bit like having a good palate for wine or something. A similar thing is true of music. You have to be able to tell what's good, but you have to also be able to tell, why it's good, what parameters are contributing, and you should be able to be in a position to help somebody else to actually hear what's good in it. So I think that one way that you can tell if your taste is getting better is if you just are more sensitive to the fine-grained details of music, and you're able to actually give an account of why you think that one tune is really good while another one isn't, or whatever, or you're able to kind of justify your aesthetic verdicts in ways that make sense to people who are also listening. And I think that's, like, some people are really good at that, some people aren't so good at that, but I think the extent to which you're good at that is a reliable kind of, barometer, basically, of whether you're succeeding in cultivating your aesthetic capacities or not.
Yeah, right. And so, one thing you're saying there is that, cultivating, improving your taste doesn't mean like, all right, I'm giving up pop and rock music and now I'm an opera and like Beethoven fan, right?
Exactly.
And that's the stuff I'm into, and I'm going to be snobby about it and look down at others who, I've transcended in some sense. It's no. Yeah. If you're into like pop, give an account of why song A is better than song B. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And, giving a full account of this would probably require me to take some sort of stance on the nature of aesthetic value. And, and I don't want to do that. And we also don't have time, but also I just don't want to do it because it's hard. But yeah, I think aesthetic value is likely going to be very localized, like in any given genre, there's going to be really good exemplars of that genre and like not so good exemplars of that genre. And I think also that, this means that taste, the aesthetic capacity, we're finite beings, right? So I might be really good at evaluating, I don't know, like krautrock or something, right? But I might be terrible at, I might be at chance when it comes to, contemporary classical music or something. And like, that's kind of fine, I think, because we're not immortal. We don't have time to do it all. But like, so, I think cultivating aesthetic capacity is about taking a deep dive into some corner of music and being able to sort of really tune yourself up to what's good and what's not in that context. And, like, there's no reason in principle why it can't be pop. Like, why not? There's some great pop. There's no reason in principle why it can't be, death metal. There's also no reason in principle why it can't be opera. It's all good, basically, is kind of my view.
Yeah, and as finite limited beings, we can't get into everything. And so that's sort of the point about aesthetic agency, right? Is that it's better for us in the long run to be able to choose for ourselves what we're going to get interested in, right? And that can be from, reading music reviews. It could be from talking to other people, right? Oh, you like X, why don't you listen to Y, right? Which in a sense is how maybe Spotify pitches itself, right?
Exactly.
But like, it lacks, as we talked about earlier, like that interpersonal dimension. Is it can't tell you why you might enjoy this. It can't give an account. It's just, oh, here's another thing you might like. And if you listen to it for more than 30 seconds, therefore you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, the interpersonal dimension goes completely missing in Spotify's recommender system. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah. And I mean, soon enough, they'll probably come out with a chat bot that can like talk you through if you want to, like, here's what's going on in this song. And here's why you might like this, which, again, like sci-fi-ish, but not too far off. And they're probably developing it right now.
Right. Like it's not too far off. And you might think that actually might ameliorate the situation a little bit, because at least then you'd have some purchase on what the parameters are or whatever. But notice that the effectiveness of one of these things is completely parasitic on the quality of discourse that exists on the internet, basically, about music. And that, insofar as that exists at all, it's going to be weighted much more in favor of certain genres than others. So like, it's perfectly likely that you could have a fancy, $100 million chatbot or whatever, but it'll be absolutely rubbish at telling you anything good about 1970s ECM jazz or something, or, I don't know whatever niche genre you're interested in, or even, contemporary classical music or whatever. So, and like also the other thing to note is that music journalism is in a really parlous state. Like critics are being sacked left, right, and center. Pitchfork was recently rolled into GQ, which is probably not good news. So, like the quality, I think, of, really thoughtful commentary about music that is available online, it's going this way. I think it's, and so, that hampers the ability of a chatbot of the kind that you're mentioning to actually make our individual situation better and help our aesthetic agency to flourish.
Yeah, right. And so pushing on the elitism question a bit more, right? In some aesthetic domains, right, it can become prohibitively expensive to cultivate your taste, right? And less so with music unless you become an audiophile, right? And then you have to buy really expensive equipment to get the perfect sound, right? Or if you become like really into live performance, then that can get really expensive. If you're going to see certain artists, that's like $350 to see Paul McCartney or whatever. Right. Or if you become interested in music as a musician, right, you've got it looks like a Guild guitar behind you, maybe.
That's right, yeah.
I've got a cheap ass kid size classical guitar behind me. I've got better stuff at home. I don't keep the good stuff on campus, but it can become really expensive to get into guitars, to get into music from the standpoint of an audiophile. It can be expensive to get into cuisine, to get into chocolate, to get into wine, as you mentioned before. And so, that may be another direction at which people think that, taste cultivation entails this cost benefit analysis where, the more expensive wine may be better in some objective or like culturally intersubjective sense. but it's not available to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with that. And I agree that there are certain domains in which cultivation of taste comes with a price tag. And you're right that that's true of music to some degree, but like notice that, you know, there's a whole heap of amazing music available really for not that much money. I mean, you know, if you live in a major city, you can go to see, I mean, even in New York City, until, you know, you could go to see world class artists in the kind of jazz scene, for example, for like $10, you know, it, and, you know, I mean, it's even like an opera ticket, like, sure, an opera ticket is expensive, but it's still cheaper than a ticket to the Yankees, you know? So, like, I don't know. And also, yeah, you mentioned audiophilia. That's also not a compulsory aspect of becoming really into music. Also, even if you are an audiophile, you can get stuff secondhand, you know, go around the thrift stores. You would be amazed at the speakers you can find in there, you know? So like, I just think with music, and as well, you know, the fact is that like the vast majority of genres of music are not, you know, like classical music is an outlier in this respect. Like tickets for the opera are still really expensive. Even in that case though, like it's getting better. At the Met in New York, there's like the top circle is like 35 quid or something, you know? So, like, yeah, I don't really, I accept that it might be true in some domains, but I don't think music is one of those domains, to be quite honest. Because, you know, as we were saying earlier, like, nobody's saying that to cultivate your taste, you have to get an expensive seat at the opera. You know, that's just not true. Like, you could also just take a deep dive into the local reggae scene or whatever, and that's not going to break the bank. So, yeah, that's kind of,
Yeah, or
I
find a really
guess,
good radio
yeah.
station online, or you know,
Exactly.
if you live in
Yeah.
a big
Yeah.
metropolitan area, then there are probably all sorts of really cool,
Yeah.
funky indie radio stations that aren't just giving
Totally.
you the top 40 hits or like
Yep.
classic rock or something, which is
Uh-huh.
what I get where I am on the radio. I am
Yeah.
not in a major market, so it's
Commiserations.
classic rock, it's country, it's Christian music. Like that's the
Right.
overwhelming majority of what I
Mhm.
get. And most contemporary rock music that's played on mainstream rock radio
Yeah.
ain't good.
Yeah. 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 100%. Um,
Like, yeah,
yeah, I mean, like I keep meaning to kind of explore digital radio a little bit better, and because you can access like a whole bunch of indie radio stations on the internet these days. So maybe that is a potential route to salvation for you in particular. I
yeah,
don't know.
yeah, yeah. One thought I
Mhm.
had while we were just talking sort of takes us back a bit, which is the point of
Mhm.
what Spotify wants is for us to, in a sense, use it as a soundtrack for our lives.
Yeah.
And this is maybe just a purely speculative question, but why do you think people want that? Like music 24/7
Mhm.
in the background. I mean, it speaks to the fact that we like music, but
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of stuff I like that I don't want around me 24/7.
Yeah. 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 I know. I know. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I'm not one of these. I'm not a 24/7 listener. I find it very hard to zone out of music.
Yeah,
Like
same.
either I'm listening or I'm not. Yeah, so I'm probably not the best person to ask about this because I don't really understand it. Um, I mean, maybe it's just, you know, people don't like silence. It's one thing, I guess. Maybe people are trying to drown out the noise of their neighbor's leaf blower or something. Um, yeah, some of it could just be noise management, I guess. But yeah, I really don't have much that's enlightening to say about this because I don't really get it myself.
No, I like that thought of sort of noise management, right? You know,
Mm.
when you know, I'm writing something, often I'll put music on in the background, and it can't
Yeah,
be something that's has too many lyrics, otherwise I'm going to get absorbed in it. So like I can't listen to hip
yeah,
hop usually
yeah,
while I'm
yeah,
writing because I just get too
yeah.
involved in like the words and the
Hmm.
wordplay and the stories, et cetera. Right. And so it needs to be like chill. It's probably
Hmm.
something I'm really familiar with, so I can zone it out.
Yeah, I think one thing to mention though comes back to what we were talking about earlier in the context of passive listening and emotional contagion. Like, I do think that people probably use music in that ubiquitous way as a kind of emotion regulator. so maybe people are, walking around the city and they don't want to be stressed out by everything that's going on. So they put on something that is explicitly chosen to put them into whatever mood that they want to be in. And, it is in principle capable of doing that, given that, it's on in the background when you're thinking about other stuff and you're figuring out your maps to get to where you want to go and whatever. So I think maybe that is also, maybe that's also a motivation for people, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Right. And I like the point further about just fear of silence, right? Like
Yeah.
when things are quiet, I'm inside my own head. And
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
a way of not allowing me to be inside my own head and sort of like
Yeah.
torturing myself in the various ways I may be prone to torturing myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Boy, yeah. And so, it's interesting then that there may be the fear of silence, but what you're suggesting with Spotify is maybe we need to cultivate a healthier fear of music, right? That these things are tracking us. And that was a Talking Heads reference, by the way, for the insiders. Yeah, I figured you got it. I'm happy with myself for that one. And precisely the sense of like it's tracking us, it's creating this profile of us, and it's selling our information to third-party entities that are trying to exploit our vulnerabilities, as you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so like I guess there's two things there. One is that if people's reaction to this was to actually, refrain from listening to music in this background constant way and actually keep music listening for like when you're really engaged, I think that would be a really great outcome of this. But one thing that I think would be a really bad outcome is that it would be that if people started viewing music itself as this kind of like dark weapon, and so therefore to be shunned and to be avoided, and actually, like, I mean, it is being used in that way right now, or at least Spotify is trying to use it in that way. There's a really great paper by a musicologist at UT Austin called Eric Drott, and it's called music. I think it's called Music as a Technology of Surveillance. And this is, his work basically has been really helpful for me in trying to understand this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think if there's also something really kind of unpleasant about the fact that Spotify claims to be the champion of music, and the kind of upholder of our privileged relationship with music and the kind of sort of safeguard of music's value and all this kind of stuff, while it's also just turning music to really nefarious ends and turning music against the people who love it the most. So anyway, that's I think it would be really bad if we ended up really kind of dismissing music because of the use to which it's currently being put.
Yeah, so it's not so much fear of music, it's fear of Spotify, right?
Yes.
Fear of AI and the algorithms, right?
Fear of the tech bros. Yeah.
Oh, God, yes. It's related to that, and I want to end on something that's adjacent to, but separate from this Spotify discussion, is I think 3 weeks ago, a number of record labels, Universal, Sony, Warner, and others, sued music generating AI companies for copyright infringement, right? That these music generating AI companies, right, are training up their artificial intelligent music generating systems on copyright protected music owned by the record labels, right? Because how else is it going to do it, right? Other than, using their catalogs to train up these things to produce things like, a brand new song by Frank Sinatra, right? It sounds like Frank Sinatra, right? But it's a brand new song. Or there's a guy, and I forget his name offhand. I'll probably have to put his name and information in the description for this video, but who will like take a particular song, I don't know, like Dr. Dre's Bitches Ain't Shit, and do it in the style of Hank Williams, right? So it sounds like a country tune done by Hank Williams, as though he were covering the song that were released decades after his death. And, that gets into uncanny valley, creepy stuff. It's kind of cool when it's done effectively, but the record labels are suing them, right, for, again, copyright infringement, but it's not to protect the artists, right? It's because they are developing their own proprietary music generating artificial intelligence systems to train up on their own catalogs to do precisely what these external companies are doing. And so, just as a way to finish off this discussion about algorithms and artificial intelligence as it relates to music, what are your thoughts on this sort of place that we find ourselves in and the future we have? And I mean, you're a recording artist yourself, and that could mean there's a future where there's a song released by you that's really released by an artificial intelligent system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big question. There's a lot of different strands to consider when we're considering generative AI and music. I think that this sort of style emulation is very troubling. I think if it's done non-consensually, it's hugely problematic, and possibly even in the case of artists who are dead, you're damaging their legacy. You are shaping their legacy in ways that they perhaps wouldn't have wanted it to be shaped. I mean, there are questions here, obviously, about whether we can wrong somebody who's dead, but anyway, we can kind of punt those off. There is something icky about it. There's obviously something very problematic about, effectively like using an artist's voice to say effectively things that the artist never intended to say. So yeah, I think a great deal more could be said about style emulation. I mean, another use to which I think generative AI might plausibly be put by people like Spotify is to try to generate music that actually matches your preferences, right? So, instead of delivering you just lists of existing music, it will actually generate for you like maybe a 40-minute unbroken ambient track that you can put on at your next dinner party that will have all the little bits that you kind of tend to enjoy in music, but that actually will just be, and also that will be perfectly suited to the kind of background listening that Spotify actually wants us to do. And I think that that's actually quite likely. I mean, the effectiveness of the generative AI programs is contingent on their being able to train the systems on large corpuses, which obviously there's roadblocks too. But assuming that gets worked out somehow, I think that situation where Spotify is deliberately generating music in order to match your preferences promises to, exacerbate even further the situation that we're currently in. It's like a major ratcheting up of things. It also promises to be very harmful to those artists who, meager though the takings from streaming might be, at least they're getting something anytime they get put in a playlist or recommended to somebody or whatever. But in this new world, all of that revenue is diverted off and kept within the walls of Spotify itself. So yeah, I mean, I think generative AI and music. I don't know. I find it hard to like think that there's anything particularly great about it. The one way in which it might be good is if it were taken out of the hands of people like Spotify and OpenAI and these kind of like megalomaniacal tech bros, and actually put back into the hands of recording musicians to use in whatever way they saw fit. So like I could have a little algorithm, train it on some of my own stuff, and I could possibly get a whole bunch of cool ideas from that, and then take those and actually fold them into my creative practice. And so in that case, like generative AI would in fact be a tool, for individual expression in the way that technology has, for really a long time, and AI has been for a long time in music. But like, that's not what they're proposing to do. And I think, so the problem really isn't technological. I think the problem is political. And if power were distributed differently, the landscape would look very different.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is precisely a political issue. It's not a technological issue, and it's not straightforwardly an aesthetic one yet.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these AI, music generators do a pretty good job of impersonating Frank Sinatra, Hank Williams, other artists, right? And so they can trick you into thinking, I don't remember them doing a cover of such and such. And then you sort of have to stop and think, well, wait a second.
Yeah.
That song was released 20 years after they died, 30 years after they died. They couldn't have done a cover of this. And so, yeah. But I mean, the issue is, if one of those pops up on a Spotify playlist, and then, people who aren't familiar with the history are just going to be like, oh, this is a weird song, or this is a cool thing. Oh, it's Frank Sinatra. That's cool.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. it kind of contaminates the pool of, music that you're actually trying to come to be able to appreciate. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's another big risk.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So I think we'll end it there. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me. This was a really awesome discussion.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too.
Awesome.